ArtSpark Texas presents a community conversation with Edie Bakker.
Welcome to Community Conversation, and we're here with Edie Bakker, who is our March Artist of the Month. And Edie has had quite an interesting life. She's um, a writer. She's living in Costa Rica currently. I guess lived around the world, or certainly lived in some unusual places. And Edie's going to talk to us tonight about her life, her writing. We're going to do a little writing exercise. And I guess April Sullivan with ArtSpark is going to officially introduce Edie and give a little introduction. And then, Edie, the floor is yours.
Okay, I feel
Hi.
like I've been introduced.
Yeah. Hi, Edie. How are you?
Hi.
So I've known Edie for several years now. She's been one of our artists at ArtSpark Texas, and a writer. And I've read several of her books, which are very interesting. If you look at our blogs, you can find some older book reviews that we've done of some of her books. But Edie has led a really interesting life and has lived in some jungles and written about her dissociative disorder, and just recently won third place for the poetry division of the Coalition of Texans with Disabilities in the paper contest. So that's why we were like, let's feature Edie now while she's famous, and get a report as a poet. So I was going to say a local poet, but now that you're not in Texas, you've retired now and moved to Costa Rica. So definitely we'd love to hear about your background, how you ended up being such a lover of Costa Rica and the rainforest, and how that's played into your life, and about your writing, and excited to do this writing exercise.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, and thank you for letting me be on here. I really appreciate it. I'm really excited about this. I was actually born in the United States, but I moved to Papua New Guinea when I was 3 years old. And Papua New Guinea is the island north of Australia. It's the eastern half of the island. It's an independent country. It is a country full of rainforests, and there are about, I don't know, plus or minus 700 different languages. It's still very wild. There's not a lot of cities, not just a few towns. I lived there for most of my childhood. My parents I call them anthropologist missionaries because they're missionaries, but my dad is an anthropologist, so he adds that side to mission work, and helps people understand culture and be more culturally sensitive and appropriate when they go out. I lived part of my life when I was a small child until the age of 7 in a jungle house made of palm stems, bark, and leaves on a lake in the rainforest. So that's where I got my love for the rainforest. It didn't include a place for schools. So I often went to foster homes for schools, some of which were okay, but many of which were very harsh. And I will explain to that later. We did live in a little community, and my parents were often there too, but a lot of the time I was in the foster homes. I lived in a little community that was like Little House on the Prairie. And it had a little store, a tiny school, a sawmill, and lots of flowers and lots of friends. And whenever we vacationed in the village, my sister and we didn't have a lot of toys. We did have a lot of fun things to do. But one of the things we did at night, every night, was we entertained ourselves by playing with words and stories. And so it was kind of interesting that when I was 15, I wrote my first story for a contest. And out of 5,000 entries, I won and my sister got second place. That's kind of when my writing career started. But I spent a year teaching school in the village after high school because they didn't know how to write and they were being abused by people around them. People around them were taking advantage of them. And so they needed to learn to read and write and to learn math, basic math skills. And so, and then when I was 18, I moved to college. I didn't fit into American culture at all. I went through a lot of cultural adjustments and found it extremely difficult and depressing. But after a year and a half, I married my high school sweetheart who was from Holland, who also immigrated to the United States from Papua New Guinea. We met in Papua New Guinea. However, between learning Dutch and working in 2 languages in Papua New Guinea, I didn't write much during those years. I didn't write at all. I just had 3 languages going through my mind or 4 languages, and so English wasn't really very smooth in my head. But at 23, I wrote my first paper. The very first paper I wrote, it was about adjusting to cultures. And to my shock, I got invited to speak at a big international conference in Ecuador. And it was a conference of missionaries, but there were hundreds of people there. And I was only one of 2 that were not PhDs that were speaking, and I was only 23. So that was quite amazing to me. And after that, I started writing a lot, and I started working on my first book on how to adjust from other cultures to that of the United States. Well, after a couple of years of that, and I had 2 kids, by the way, I also spent some time living in Holland with my husband before I had my kids. But after a couple of years of that, I heard that the rainforest that I had grown up in was about to be logged. And this disturbed me very, very much. And I stayed up one night till 2 o'clock in the morning and wrote a letter to National Geographic. And they did not, they didn't totally reject it. I thought they rejected it because they said they weren't going to do anything about it. But apparently they sent it all over the world because I started getting calls from Yale and Harvard and the Papua New Guinea government. And so it eventually got back around to them, and I was asked to lead an expedition, not lead it, the first expedition I didn't lead, but to go on an expedition and to write an article for them. I was then, after I got to take the whole family to the Huntsine rainforest again, the rainforest that I grew up in hopes of saving it. And I was, after we went through this 3-month expedition and came back and I wrote the article, I was asked to lead a second expedition to take a photographer to get 5 more pictures for the article. That's the way it works. It was amazing. They spent $60,000 just to get 5 pictures. And of course, he took thousands of pictures, but they only wanted to pick 5 out of them. And that expedition was a real adventure of exploration because we went up a mountain that had never been explored before. It was a very unique mountain. The rainforest was very unique. It's surrounded by swamp, and so it developed its own little ecosystem. The article came out in the February 1994 issue. Now, after this, soon after this, a terrible thing happened in my life, and all the instability from my childhood came crashing down. And I did have a complete nervous breakdown, and I was mentally ill for the next 20 years. During that time, I journaled and wrote poetry. I wrote and wrote and wrote. I filled up so many journals with everything I thought, some of which later, as I was packing to come down here, I looked at some of the stuff I wrote and I couldn't believe it. I thought, that's just horrible. Not that it was horrible writing, but it was just horrible, period. I mean, I wrote awful things, but I wrote everything in my heart. And I think that really honed my skills as a writer, just to get everything out. And during that time, I also attended a creative writing cooperative school for 6 years. and got what was the equivalent of a fine arts master's in writing. They focused on creativity, not the business side of writing. So it was a very intense course, even though I dragged it out over 6 years on how to write. Now, the type of illness that I had, as April mentioned, I had DID, which is used to be called multiple personality disorder. It enabled me to put myself in other people's shoes because I was experiencing being different people, as it were, and different ways of thinking. So it enabled me to write fiction because I could understand other people. And after 10 years of therapy and medication, with God's help, I was able to understand my abusive circumstances, forgive my abusers, and get completely healed. That was 10 years ago. As soon as I got well, I started writing nonfiction books. The first book I wrote was Crocodile Set Free, which I don't have with me. It is a memoir of how my childhood, how I ended up being sick, and how I got well. And it's a very deep book. April's read it. Then I wrote Rendezvous with the Rainforest, which I can show you. And this is the story of the. It's got pictures on the back too. You can't probably see the pictures very well. I put it up close to the camera. It's about the rainforest and the 2 expeditions that we went on. And after that, I finally finished the book I had started way back when I was 23, When Cultures Collide, about adjusting to the United States. Now, after I wrote these 3 nonfiction books, I had a medicinal stroke from trying to get off a medication that I didn't need anymore, and it caused me to lose my memory. They don't do much about, they do experiments to see what side effects you have, but they don't do much about side effects of getting off of medication. And apparently this is one you couldn't get off of. So having lost, I got most of my memory back, but I never got that sharpness that enabled me to write nonfiction. So I switched to fiction. And the first fiction book I wrote, I have here, was What Matters Most. And all my fiction books are actually Christian fiction love stories with a twist in them. They're not your traditional, they're not like Hallmark movies where you can tell on the first page who marries who. They're not like that at all. I worked really hard to get them to be very unique and very interesting. But I wrote Chrissy, An End Times Adventure. I wrote Shining Armor, and my most recent book was Coronavirus, Hope for Amy. Obviously, that was last year. All of these can be found on Amazon.com under, if you type in books, and then because for some reason, if you just type in Edie Bakker, it goes crazy. But if you type books and then you type in Edie Bakker, which is spelled EDIE BAKKER. So it's Edie with 1 D, EDIE, and BAKKER, which is like Baker with 2 Ks. And you can find any of them on Amazon.com. I have 7 books altogether. 3 years ago, I started dreaming of moving to Costa Rica, where the people are friendly and the weather is great. And we moved down here 3 months ago, immigrating for the second time in our lives. I am still content editing for other people, and I have been for several years, and I continue to do so. And I'm rewriting a little bit of my brother's book about my parents' experiences in Papua New Guinea right at the moment. It's my latest project. So now I would like to give you 10 writing hints. I don't know if you have a paper, if you want to write these down. I'm going to repeat them twice so that anyone who does want to write them down can get a hold of them. Okay. The first writing hint that I have comes from a successful preacher that I heard about who was very uneducated, and I wish I could remember his accent, but it was a very uneducated accent. But someone asked him why he was so successful, and he said, I tell them what I'm going to tell them, then I tell them what I tell them, and then I tell them what I told them. So you make, that is a formula that really works for papers. I got my husband through law school with that formula, and he didn't get all the way through law school, but he got halfway through law school. Um, um, so you make your endings wrap around to the beginning. Now I'm going to repeat that. Number one is I tell them what I'm going to tell them, then I tell them what I tell them, and then I tell them what I told them. So number two, all stories, this one I know you all know, all stories need a problem, a crisis, and a resolution. So when you're planning a story, you think of the problem. That's where you start. You start in the middle with the problem, then you set up how it happened, and you tell how it got resolved. I can't tell you how many times people have asked me to edit a book, which is just a whole series of events, and they don't resolve themselves, and they aren't set up. They're just event after event after event, and there's not much you can do with that. Every culture has its own form of storytelling, and in our culture, all stories have that form. All stories do, and that's not true about other cultures. For instance, in our culture, it has to come out somewhat good. And some cultures, sometimes the story, like in the culture that I worked with in Papua New Guinea, sometimes the stories would come out good, sometimes they would come out bad. You just never knew who was going to win in the end. So number two is all stories need a problem, a crisis, and a resolution. When you're planning a story, think of the problem first, set up how it happened, and tell how it got resolved. Number three, the resolution can be a big change of circumstances or a change of heart. So it could be like somebody got married, or some town got saved, or something major like that. Or it could be a simple change of heart that you realize you're never going to do that. I think of About Smith. I don't know if anyone's ever seen that with Jack Nicholson. That whole story, he simply had a change of heart, and it's a really good movie. Um, and that's all that happened in that story. So the number three is the resolution can be a big change of circumstances or a change of heart. So number four, if your story is sad, put some happy sections in it. People need to laugh and cry. When I first wrote my memoir, it was very sad, and people could not relate to it, and it was a bomb. I mean that sometimes people say that in a good way, but I mean that in a bad way. It bombed out. Nobody wanted to read it. And somebody in my writing school said, you've got to put happy stories in it. And so I put in stories about cave exploring, stories about my animals. I love animals. I've had pets all my life. I put stories in about going canoeing, and it worked. And now that book is very popular. Everybody that reads it seems to like it. So you just put some happy sections in if your story is sad. That's number four. Number five, if you have a collection of pieces, lay them out in a row, you're going to laugh at this, on the floor, and arrange them in order using flashbacks if necessary to keep the story progressing properly. So you want that problem, and then the setting it up, and then the resolution. So even if you have a whole series of journal entries, arrange them so that they're like that, so that they keep that pattern. And I just lay them across the floor. That's my thing. So I'll read that again. If you have a collection of pieces, lay them out across the floor and arrange them in order using flashbacks if necessary to keep the story progressing properly. You don't need to, number six is you don't need to include everything. If you were abused, or if you had anything happen to you, you may want to have one or two stories about it, but you don't want to have every time it happened. I know a lady who's writing a book about her abuse, and every time she was abused is in that book, and it is a horrendous book. It's not going to be anything anyone wants to read because it's so depressing. And really all she needed was maybe 3 stories, and we would get the idea of that. So number 7, that's number 6 was you don't need to include everything. Number 7 is make everything in your story part of the plot or the main theme, even the descriptions. So for example, the way you describe the weather or a person or a scene should reflect the story. For for example, it was a warm and sunny morning, or it was a dark and gloomy day. So how you describe the day, how you describe the mountains, how you describe the lake, the person, that should all reflect the story. Don't add anything that is irrelevant. There's no need to have anything that's irrelevant. And on number 8, I'm going to read number 7 again. Make sure everything in the story is part of the plot or the main theme, even the descriptions. Number 8, you need only a few key pieces in your description of each key item. So was a big help to me. I learned this when I was working on a screenplay. If you're just, let's say you're describing somebody, you want people to know they're rich, you want them to know that they're kind of quirky, they're not Miss America. Put that they have a crooked nose, that they're wearing a Rolex watch, tell how their hair is, and maybe tell what they're wearing. You don't need to have, in the old days, back in the a long time ago, they used to write a whole page on every scene, and they don't do that anymore. And so you just need enough so that the person reading the story has a picture in their mind of who this person is, and they have a different picture for each character. So that's number 8. You only need a few key pieces in your description of each key item. Number 9, don't worry about spelling and grammar until the second or third time around. Stephen King's drafts are almost unrecognizable compared to the final story. I don't know if any of you have read his book. I wish I knew the name of it. I can't think of the name of it, but he wrote a book about his writing experience, and he has examples in there, and they are absolutely, it's astonishing to see how much he ended up crossing out from his first draft to his final draft. He almost replaces the whole document. So the reason for that is and that leads to number 10. I'm going to read number 9, and then I'm going to tell you the reason for that, because number 9 was don't worry about spelling or grammar until the second or third time around. Number 10 is write from the heart, correct with your mind. That's the last one. Write from the heart, correct with your mind. The reason for that is because writing is really a right brain activity. You want your creative side, your artistic side to come out in your writing, and you don't want it to be interrupted by your left brain, your mathematical side. And the mathematical side is going to come out when you work on the spelling, the corrections and the grammar and all of that stuff. So that's number 10, write from the heart, correct with your mind. And that's all the writing hints I have. Now, I have a cluster writing exercise. And I'm going to show you a picture of what to do. And if you want to do this, you can do it. You may want to do it afterwards. But this is a cluster writing experience. And what you do is you write a word that you want to write about. This gets things out from the inside. In fact, the beginning of that poem that I wrote that won third prize was a cluster writing exercise. And I got out of myself that I really was DID, and I didn't believe it. And later, with the therapist and everything, it was proven. You don't have to write any of this down. I'm just going to show you how I did this. My husband recently broke his foot. So I put broken foot in the first circle. And then around that, you want 5 or 6 other words, and they are anything that just comes to your mind. It could be refrigerator, it could be Antarctica, it could be, elated, whatever comes to your mind, you draw a line and a circle around a word. And so I put rob, because that's what came to my mind, and fell. And then I put stone, and I put hot. I don't know if y'all can see this. I'm going to get it in the screen. I put hot, and then I put river. Okay, then you go through one more time and you put words around each of those words. So you're going to put 3 or 4 words around each of those words. You've got them circled. And now when I put Rob, I put carrying dogs, my beloved husband cares. And when I put fell, I put on a rock, way out, road, dogs, pain. And when I put stone, I put embedded, sharp, hidden. When I put hot, the words that came to my mind were water, soothing, wild, and bath. And then when I put, let's see, when I put river, the words that came to my mind were wet, dogs, relaxing, and fun. So you're probably thinking, how's all this come together? Oh, the last one was ended vacation, and I put mountains, trip back, scared, and hairpin turns. And so you've got this piece, and now what you do is you start writing from, this is a way to get your right brain really going. You start writing from the beginning. Like I started with broken foot. I started with Rob. And you just start writing around the circles, around and around and around, right? Whatever comes to your mind. I'm going to read to you exactly what came to my mind, which is not, I'll show this again in a minute, but I'm going to read to you exactly I didn't correct this. I didn't do anything to this. This is just my right brain talking. Rob, my beloved husband, was carrying our 2 dogs out of the hot river when he slipped and fell on a sharp rock embedded in an embankment and broke his foot. He was on his way out of the jungle to the road when he felt the searing pain. Needless to say, it cut our vacation short. We had just enjoyed a wild bath in a rapid volcanic river in the jungle with the dogs. One dog fretted on the bank while the other soaked in our arms. It wasn't our last adventure, however. Rob drove us home through a winding mountain pass with hairpin turns and dangerous cliffs. The scenery was beautiful, but I couldn't help thinking of his sore foot on the pedals of our careening car as I enjoyed the magnificent views. So I got all that out of this. And as you can see, I didn't use everything. I didn't use the word cares. I did add some things. I added volcanic to explain what kind of hot river it was. But basically, I just went around the circle and wrote what came to my mind. Now, the interesting thing is you can write poetry this way, and that's what I did in that poem that I got 3rd place with. And so I wrote this into a poem just as an example. And this is the last thing I'm going to share with you. I'm going to read this poem that I wrote out of this little paragraph. My beloved husband slipped a sharp embedded rock, excruciating pain. He was carrying our 2 dogs when he fell. The hot volcanic river we had just swum, soaking the dogs and ourselves, became our last excursion. Now a new adventure, a winding mountain pass, hairpin turns, dangerous cliffs. The driver, with a broken foot, brought us home. So that's all I have to share. And notice that it comes back around to the beginning, like I said. And that's it. That's what I have, April. Thank you.
Thanks. That was great. I didn't know we were going to get 10 tips for writing, so I wrote them down.
Well, you asked me to do that, so.
It was terrific. It was great. Loved it.
Yeah,
Thank
do we
you.
have
Yeah.
any questions from anybody?
I really
Do you want me to
enjoyed
put it on?
I enjoyed hearing your story, and that I love the exercise with the circles.
Yeah, I would encourage you all to try it, even if you've done it before. I find that it's very cathartic, and it gets my right brain going. It gets me into a creative mood, and it just works. It's just amazing.
So I have a I have a personal question. With your diagnosis of dissociative personality, I mean, as a child,
Sure.
when did you think? When did this begin to manifest itself? Did this happen early in your life, and they always just thought you were a odd little girl or a precocious little girl, or how did that all play out in your young life?
Well, that is pretty much how it played out. You become DID before the age of 8. And what happens is that many children are actually DID. A child dissociates from things they can't comprehend, they can't put together. And I couldn't put together the beauty of the rainforest, for example, with the festering wounds from the mosquito bites. And there were many things that I couldn't put together. I couldn't put together the different cultures of the different homes that I lived in. And so I began to recreate myself over and over again to fit each situation. And as long as I switched from situation to situation, like if I was writing, I really wasn't a very good mother because I would forget that the kids were in the living room playing and I would forget to watch them, or I might be cooking and I was the cook and I was a really good cook. I thought I was a very creative person, but at the same time I might forget that the kids were in the bathroom and one time they cut their foot because I was cooking. And so that's kind of how it manifested itself until my nervous breakdown. And what happens with the nervous breakdown is, and that's the lay term, there really is no such thing as a nervous breakdown. No psychologist would recognize that term. But what happens is that your circumstances, and I can't talk about my circumstances, but the circumstances were so difficult and so devastating that my system, which was so carefully balanced, just crashed. And all of a sudden, I was the wrong person in the wrong place at the wrong time. So then I needed the therapy to get it all sorted out. And it's really not that complicated. The therapy is not that complicated if you have a really good therapist, because basically you just need to come to acceptance of each part and accept them into yourself and accept the way, so you become as a whole. And I probably said too much about it already, but my brother just wrote an interesting story about his transition from Papua New Guinea to the United States and how he's having to integrate those two sides of him now. And so that's basically it.
I don't find that unusual at all because, I've never been to Papua New Guinea, but I've heard about it, and I actually have a car that I purchased when I was in Australia that was from Papua New Guinea, and it's such a different culture from America that I can just imagine the confusion that you felt as a young girl trying to
Mhm.
trying to understand what all of this was.
Sure.
But we're delighted you're here and that you're writing, and your writing is wonderful, and that you're
Thank
sharing
you.
your story, and that you're feeling strong enough to share your story with us. I really appreciate that.
Thank you, Celia.
And Edie, this is Diane. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you loud and clear.
I really enjoyed it, and I just want to let you know that I really miss you.
Oh, thank you. I miss you too.
Okay, I had to get that in.
Does anybody else have any questions?
I was going to ask about you said you had the medicinal stroke, and I think I remember that because we were talking on the phone a lot at that time, and you were having, like, speaking to me was really hard verbally. You remember that?
Yeah.
When we would have these conversations and yeah.
I don't remember much
Oh,
of
you don't?
anything at that
Because of the
time, but I
memory.
know we've been friends since long before my medicinal stroke. But
Yeah.
I didn't even remember my dogs' names. I didn't know where I lived. I didn't know anything. And
How did you
I
get all of that back?
the name of, well, what I did is I had to go back on the medication. The name of the medication happens, I'm going to tell it, it's Abilify. When they started realizing that it was causing, quote, Alzheimer's disease in people that got off of it after many years, which I had been on it for many years, they sold the company back to Japan and got rid of it. It was invented in Japan, and they ditched the company so they wouldn't be sued. And how I got my memory back was just by relearning everything. I actually had to relearn getting out of bed. I was falling out of bed because I didn't know how to get out of bed. I had to relearn everything. And it took me about 3 years. But like, for instance, now I crochet. I can crochet just about anything because I remembered that I had crocheted before my stroke, and so I call it a stroke. It was a medicinal stroke, but I got a book and learned how to crochet all over again. And this time I went by the book, so now I can do anything.
So you're back on that medicine.
I'm back on it. Yeah, I'll be on it for the rest of my life.
That's Celia. That's I think, pretty sure that's the medicine Milton was on that he got off of that caused a lot of his problems. My late husband was on that medicine, and it really changes your brain chemistry so much that you'd have to go back on it to
Yeah,
Right.
he was never the same. It was really
Yeah.
a tragedy.
There's one other one that I'm on like that I'll have to be on the rest of my life, and I can share the name of it if you want it. But it's frustrating to me that out of all those years, I feel completely well, and yet I'm still on two
You should take
psychotropic meds because I can't get off of them, and
Oh.
they just
so mad.
yeah.
So wrong. I'm curious. You said that you know, after your medicinal stroke, you couldn't write nonfiction anymore, and so you're writing fiction. And how is that different? How is that different for you?
Well, the nonfiction that I wrote, I got accused of writing creative nonfiction instead of nonfiction.
Okay.
When I wrote Rendezvous with the Rainforest, I remembered, because I was DID, I could go back into the personality that was in the jungle and remember exact conversations verbally, word for word. I could remember the smells, the tastes, the sights, the sounds. And so I could write as if I was there. And that's the same with my memoir book, Crocodile Set Free. I remember things from my childhood just as if they were happening right now. I did remember. And so that's what I based my nonfiction writing on. I lost that clear, sharp memory that was a gift. And now I have I think is normal. I think what I have now is what a normal memory feels like, where you just kind of vaguely remember, yeah, I did that. Oh, yeah, now that you mention it, but I don't smell, taste, and see exactly what happened anymore. And so to me, I lost the edge. But being different personalities and really getting to know a lot of different kinds of people, I came to understand people so that I can put them in their shoes, even men. A lot of my books are about men, and I can write as if, like, my main character in What Matters Most is a male, and I can feel how he thinks and what he does, and so that's why I switched to um to fiction.
Interesting.
I'm sitting here wondering about um, what your dreams might be. Like, literally, when you're asleep, are you dreaming vivid memories, or are you remembering your dreams at all?
Uh, my dreams are very vivid and they're very confused. I don't know what country I'm in. I think I'm in Papua New Guinea half the time. I don't know where I'm at. I had nightmares for years. I had horrible, horrible nightmares, and those are all gone, and I'm really excited about that. But um, yeah, my mind is very mixed up in terms of imagery and location and that sort of thing when it's trying to reproduce what I go through in the daytime, which is what your brain does with its dreams. It reproduces what you go through in the daytime.
That's pretty scary.
Yeah, still a little scary. At least it's not nightmares, so I don't have tornadoes coming at me and hiding under a desk. And no, I don't have that kind of dream anymore. So I'm really grateful for that.
That's good.
Yeah. Interesting.
So,
I started
well,
trying to, I started
start a
doing,
circle right.
I started a little bit of that cluster writing
Very good.
um,
Very
about
good.
our big freeze.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
there's something traumatic to write about.
I
For sure.
started making that. Yeah. I think I probably have to write about that a little bit.
Yeah, you should complete it. Go ahead and put more words around the words that you have.
I was
Yes,
but interested in what you were saying. So I had to stop.
Boy, were you going to say something?
yeah, I was just gonna say, Celia, we're doing the speaking advocates, like we're in it right now. I've been finishing it up, and that would be a great exercise at some point in the class for people who don't see themselves as creative, to bring out
Mhm.
their stories. I think I liked that tool, and also your writing hints are things that those of us who write kind of take for granted often, but and forget that other people don't think like that. Like I was just having a conversation with coaching one of them today and saying, yeah, that first paragraph, you got to bring the last paragraph to reflect it. It's got to come around. It's got to bring us home. You got to do something to do that, and in the way you present it as well. And so I really appreciate. And by the way, the book is called On Writing.
Oh, I think I've read it.
Yes, Stephen
I'm
King.
not sure.
Yeah, the Stephen
Oh,
King book is
the
called
Stephen
On
King
Writing.
book. Is that? Yeah, I was gonna say I read it on writing, but that was before my stroke, so I don't know.
Yeah, yeah, it's one of my
Yeah,
favorite books too.
yeah, yeah. So
I like the
yeah,
tip about
I've used it a lot with children. The circle writing.
Oh.
It's called cluster writing, actually.
Can I say
Go ahead.
something?
Yes,
I don't know who it was that just was speaking about talking to someone about bringing their paragraph around to the beginning, but I was going to talk about the circle writing, and what I agree with her. What it does is it fosters encouragement for them to write, and it helps. I'm sure helps their self-confidence and self-esteem when writing, because when they do the circle words and they're able to actually put a story together, then all of a sudden, wow, I wrote a story. I did this. I'm successful, and I think it's really a good tool also. So that's just my 2 cents worth.
Diane is a Montessori teacher,
Oh,
so she would know
What?
that.
Yeah, the family
What?
counselor.
Well, she's retired.
Yes, so it was a wonderful career.
April, are
Anyway,
I find it's kind of like your life right now is kind of like you're writing a story because you know were spent so much of your early life in a jungle and now you're living in a jungle again. But
Yeah,
going full circle.
it's on your
It's
own.
like going full circle. I'm sorry.
that's true. Very true. Feels like that.
But hopefully it's the sequel, not the end.
Yes.
Yeah. Hope I have a few more years left.
Yeah, it's terrific. So you said you're working on a book now, but you're working on rewriting your brother's book?
Well, my brother's book is about my parents. You can see my parents under Wayne Dye. They're sitting
Well, I
there.
wondered if those were your parents. Hello.
Yes. They, of course, they had a very exciting life being missionary anthropologists in Papua New Guinea, and
Yeah.
some of the things that they learned. And my brother, the one that wrote, that I told you wrote about jet planes and jungles, about integrating his life now. One of the things he did to do that is he wrote their story. So it needs some editing, and I'm a content editor. That's what I do. So I'm going to work on it, and we haven't quite decided to what extent to change it yet. But we're talking about that today.
So are you still in Papua New Guinea, or are you back in the States?
We're Texas.
No, I'm in Costa Rica.
Yeah, I know, but your parents, I wonder where they are.
Oh,
Alice.
talking to them.
The last 20 years, we've primarily been teachers. And there's a school here for missionaries, so we teach there
In Dallas, you said?
in Dallas. Yeah.
Okay.
It's very small, it's very
They teach-
specialized, so it's small. Yeah.
That's
They
quite
teach people how to be culturally appropriate.
That's great. Excellent.
Yeah.
Excellent.
It's fairly complicated stuff. So, the courses are mostly graduate. I teach graduate courses because you kind of have to have some background so you can figure out what's going on with somebody else's way of life, and that fits in with them being good people and you being good people, but you're not doing the same thing and all this kind of stuff. So we work.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for doing that work. It's very important.
Edie, is your father teach those classes online?
Yeah, but I think they're closed. I think you have to pay for them.
Yeah.
Yep.
I'm teaching a non-credit course right now along with a team of people. But it's very specialized for people, how to get people involved in using the Bible. And that's open to everybody, but we're in the middle of it right now. We're starting over again in another 6 months probably.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, it's our regular paid university courses. It's an accredited university.
Terrific.
Well, thank you for being on this with us, Edie. We really appreciate it. It's so great to see you.
You're welcome.
All the way
I
across
feel
the
sorry for the people that didn't get to come.
I know,
because-
well, we recorded it, so.
Yeah.
But thank you for
It'll-
listening. You're a
Yes.
great audience.
Thank you to our Arts Park Texas funders: Texas Commission on the Arts, St. David's Foundation, Cultural Arts City of Austin Economic Development, National Endowment for the Arts, Creative Forces, Austin Public Library, Donald D. Hamill Foundation.